I'm Doug Cook. I'm your host for tonight. I'm the Education Events Coordinator for NOFA Mass. And before we get started, I'd like to thank all of the NOFA Mass board and staff who've contributed to the production of this webinar, the fourth in a series of 5 events focusing on improving your pastures and products with intensive grazing practices. We also like to thank our grant funders, the Massachusetts Dairy Farmers and Berkshire Taconic Community Foundation Green Pastures Fund to preserve and encourage small community-based agricultural ventures in the Berkshires. And our sponsors, Organic Valley. You can learn more about Organic Valley Co-op at organicvalley.coop. And most importantly, we want to thank you, the viewers and listeners, especially to our members who make our education and advocacy work possible. If you find this event useful or inspiring, please become a NOFA Mass member or make a donation to support our important work. And now I'm pleased to introduce our presenters, Will and Amelia Conklin. Amelia realized her love for the small town farming life when serving in the agricultural sector of the Peace Corps in Paraguay. Upon completion of the program, she moved back to her hometown in Sheffield to work on her family's farm. She branched out on her own in 2012 with a cow but no land. And shortly after, she met Will, who had land but no cows. The newest version of Skyview Farm was born. Will always felt drawn to stewarding his grandfather's land and returned after many years working and studying and traveling elsewhere. In 2007, he committed to being full-time and officially inherited the land from his father.
Hello. Good evening.
Great. When a couple more people showed up, and we're just gonna jump right into a quick introductory video that I made for you all. All right.
Hi, I'm Amelia Conklin.
I'm Will Conklin. We're Skyview Farm here in Sheffield, Massachusetts. We have dairy cows, beef cows, hogs, breeding pigs, and we do some meat chickens. And we also do raw milk in our basement.
We keep breeding stock for all of our animals except the chicks. For meat birds, we do buy from a large hatchery. Otherwise, we keep 3 sows and about 6 to 8 dairy cows and about 6 to 8 beef brood cows, and calves and yearlings and bulls all mixed in there.
Total herd of about 30 bovine.
Yep.
Yep.
And about 20 hogs at any given moment.
Yep, 20 to 30 pigs at any given time.
We're harvesting 8 beef a year, 40 hogs a year, 400 chickens a year, and pounds of milk. I'd have to do some real quick math. 7,000 pounds of milk a year, my guess.
Yep, 7 to 10 this year.
I was going to say, yeah, no, we're at 50 pounds a day now, so yeah, maybe 10,000 pounds of milk a year.
Yep. Yep. Our CSA is on a monthly cycle. We have folks come over the span of a week, typically starting the first weekend of every month. Full share is 12 pounds a month, half share is 6 pounds a month. And we have, like you said earlier, what, how many families?
50.
50 families, many of whom have been with us for 7 years, something like that. We definitely like the direct-to-consumer model. We do some select farmers markets in the winter in particular now. We used to do some summer markets, but they didn't really work for us from a time and profitability standpoint. Before the year of COVID, we did some events where we would grill our sausages. But it seems like the demand for local food is going to make up for some of that lost revenue this year. But that was part of our business model.
We sell meat to about 50 subscribing CSA members and about 35 households for milk, for raw milk. We started our business in 2012 and have been, I was going to say growing ever since, but we intentionally stopped growing, expanding our production in 2017 in order to ensure that our systems were appropriate for the amount of land that we have access to, and that's where we are today.
The systems that Amelia mentioned include rotational grazing of the cattle. We have some more intensive grazing with the dairy cows that move from paddock to paddock either once a day or every 2 days in the summer, depending on the size. We have our broiler chickens that move around those same paddocks not quite in lockstep, but pretty close, certainly adding fertility as they go. Our pigs pasture, per se, in the woods, and we are working to improve and add paddocks so that they can move around even more. But that's been a great way for us to raise hogs and make use of the land here. We have 50 acres, probably 25 in pasture, and the other 25 is either wetland or wet areas that we don't do anything with, or forested areas that we either range the pigs in, or we do take some forest products as well, and include that in another piece of the business, which is sawing native lumber. Want to say more about the basement dairy?
Yeah, we milk once a day, which can be unusual for a dairy. We've found it to be very successful to have the calves on the cows during the day nursing. This eliminates the need to feed bottles to calves, and we find the calves do better. They are more healthy. If they have diarrhea, they tend to heal quickly on their own with their mothers. And this eliminates, obviously, the need to milk in the afternoon. So it saves us a lot of labor. We're still happy with the yield that we're getting in the morning. And we worked with the state to develop the 2 little rooms in our basement that we use. Go in there. And they are up to date and certified, and those 2 little rooms took us years and years to build out in an appropriate way that pleased the inspector and passed code, but we did it.
One of the reasons we did that was, as we decided we wanted to get a certified raw dairy, there's a lot of infrastructure needed for that, typically concrete floors and impermeable walls and things like that, and looking at the cost of constructing that anew was prohibitive, but we had an open walkout basement that had some of those components already there. The mechanicals were there, the plumbing was there, and so that saved a lot of expense for sure. And for us, milking 1 cow at a time, milking no more than, we've never milked more than 4 cows at any given time. So on that scale, it has worked quite nicely. We have a small bulk tank that we use.
I have seen the pastures improve, I can say with certainty, every year improvement, which is not a given. Putting animals on pasture does not necessarily improve them, but I think with proper, really just proper moving at the right time, they do.
Yep.
Yeah. Better forage species, is the main
Definitely.
indicator that I look for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Vigor of the species too. Yeah, when we started, like I said, the land has been in my family for 4 generations, but much of the land had not been grazed for going on 20 or 30 years, and so in some places we had 4 to 6 inch pine trees. We had lots of multiflora rose and bittersweet, barberry. Those were the main invasives that had come in, and so through some help with NRCS and using our own equipment, we took down trees. We did some forestry mowing. We did a fair bit of brush hogging. But then once the animals go on, then it's just about waiting for, I'd say it takes about 3 years. We didn't do much of any overseeding, a little bit one year, some frost seeding with pasture species, but on the whole, the pastures came back with the seed bank already that's already in there.
We had a whole field of thistle that has literally 10 thistle plants left. I mean, it was
a lot. Yeah.
I mean, it was maybe 50 to 60 burly thistles in there. That was impressive.
Mm-hmm. The multiflora was impressive. It was 6, 8, 10 feet high in places for sure. We haven't really used the hogs too much to clear pasture land, but they could if we asked them.
We've used them to clear invasive species in the woods. They've cleared barberry and multiflora rose in the woods, and we have seen those plants stay away for years after taking the pigs out. Yeah, that was cool.
That was a quick introduction, and with that, I was thinking, Will and Amelia, you could say a little bit about why you decided to get into farming.
Okay. I decided to it was kind of a progression of just feeling like I had a connection with the land, with this particular piece of land that was in my family. It was actually an sort of an adjunct piece of land to the larger dairy farm that my cousin now runs a sod farm on. But this piece up in the hills that was non-contiguous came down through my father, and we always had neighboring, the neighboring farmer grazed his cows there for a number of years, but once he got out of dairying, he backed off of that, and that's how we got those overgrown pastures that I alluded to. But I always just kind of wanted to bring them back and thought it was a good use of the land, and just always felt like it needed some kind of grazing. I started with goats, but I had an affinity for cows, and so it sort of took off from there.
Yeah, I always liked manual labor, so there's plenty of that. I also think there's a piece of it is sort of a corny way to put it, but feels like it's in my blood, or in my, just comes down, sort of like a family of so many doctors or whatever other profession. My maternal and paternal grandfathers were dairy farmers, and I just loved cows from an early age. And I also found it in my intellectual years or growth years in college and early 20s. I just landed on farming as one of the ways to reduce my carbon footprint and do meaningful work.
And you mentioned some of the pastures were overgrown. About how many acres would you say that you've restored since you've been back?
It's about all 20 to 25, yeah. They were virtually ungrazable. Some of them just had smaller infestations of multiflora rows and such, but they had been let to grow to maturity, the grasses, that is, for many years, and then on came the early succession forest species with pine, 4 to 6 inch caliper pines and such. So it was, we started with the easiest ones to brush hog, and then moved on to the more intensive ones with where we had to remove the small trees and do some forestry mowing to get after the especially the multi rows that was too big to really handle with even a good sized brush hog.
Mm-hmm. And so when you started, you said you had goats first? Did you sort of work your way up to cows and pigs and chickens? What did you start with?
Goats were first, and that was actually before we got together that I got goats, and because I had heard that they were good brush clearers, and so I tried to let them do that, and they were pretty good at that, and we had some success with goats. What we did find out was that our land has heavier soils, and spots can be pretty wet, and we wound up having problems with their hooves, and feeling like the land wasn't as well suited to goats as maybe to the cows. And I definitely think we made the right decision there, although we've, from one learning curve to another, there are certainly spots where we learned not to put the cows because being so much bigger and heavier, they can do a lot more damage in wet ground. So it's a give and take.
All right. That brings up a good point. How densely do you typically stock your paddocks?
I'd say we have, typically we're running 10 to 12 animals in half acre paddocks.
Mm-hmm. And how often do you move your herds?
Yeah, we do. We have rented land where we're doing the most intensive grazing. We're moving those groups every day to 2 days, depending on the time of year and the thickness of the grass.
There is observation involved. Of course, it's not totally formulaic. You could make it totally formulaic, but ideally you would observe the pasture, observe the animals, etc. but it's about every other day in the more intensely managed, with the more intensely managed herd.
You made a good point. So what are the factors that you take into account when deciding whether to move them or leave them for a little bit more time in a paddock?
Yeah, really mainly two things: animal behavior. If they are not on the pasture and they are constantly at the water trough or constantly in the trees or other loafing areas, they may just be unhappy, and it's clear, you know, you only want to see them there maybe 2 to 3 times a day. If you're seeing them 4 to 8 times constantly going out to the pasture, taking a nibble and coming back in, that's a good indicator. And then the other indicator is the pasture itself. What types of plants are left, the plant height and maturity, and yeah, those two things.
As you move them fairly regularly, what have you found successful in type of fencing and methods of moving fencing?
So the main pastures are all the perimeter of the pasture is high tensile electric, three wires of that. That was we put that in with the help of NRCS program, and then all the pasture divisions and subdivisions within that perimeter fence is with polywire. One strand.
A single strand. And do you have that on a reel, basically?
We don't. No.
We finally acquired enough materials to have all of the paddocks pre-set. So you're just closing, opening, all the time. And yeah, the cows follow, behave.
So then how many paddocks would you say you have in total?
We have about 16 to 18 with the more intensively managed herd. Mm-hmm. We're trying, you try to make it so you can let the grass rest for 30 days, give or take.
And I was wondering if we could switch gears a little bit over to your chickens. We saw you have a hoop house design, and I was wondering if you could tell us about how do you like that design? How many chickens do you sort of rotate through your pastures any given time?
Yeah, we typically rotate 1 or 2 batches of 100 each. And because of the way our land is, just because of the way the land is, it's not very flat. And so currently we're only able to rotate them in what we call the island field. And therefore the island field has become the powerhouse of all of our fields. The forage has returned just incredibly lush. It grows faster. There are more desirable species, mainly clover, white and red clover. We would love to put them on the other fields, but it's not flat enough, and so it allows access to too many predators. Mm-hmm. So that's something we're always thinking about how to remedy.
And then for your pigs, you send them into the woods. How do you set up your pig fencing in the woods?
It's also exclusively polywire, 2 strands, about 8 inches and 14 to 16, 12, 16 inches off the ground, depending on the size of the pig. And we typically stock about 6 to 10 growing animals, and I think the paddocks are probably pushing an acre. They're sort of long and thin, and what we're working on is trying to rotate them through those and let those paddocks recover a bit. We've been able to use a piece of our neighbor's land that was recently logged, and so it's kind of an interesting experiment in seeing what kinds of plant species come back without any livestock interference, and what comes back where the pigs are. So we'll let you know in 2 years.
So how long do your pigs stay in the paddocks that they're in?
Depends, but it's in these big paddocks, they're in there most of their grow. You know, if a growing hog is going to be in there for 3 or 4 months.
Mm-hmm. And then, would you move the paddock after they're done growing and set up a new group in a different paddock? Is that what I gather?
Yep.
Well, similarly to the cow paddocks, we've acquired enough fencing materials to leave all of the paddocks up and just rest them, just not stock any there. That's the ideal scenario.
Yeah.
Right. Sort of permanent paddocks in rotation. That's nice. Cool. So when you first started learning about, this type of management, where did you look to learn more information, and what resources would you recommend for people looking to start implementing these systems?
I'll put a plug in for NOFA. I definitely first learned about the grazing and all the NRCS programs at a NOFA conference in Worcester. That was kind of the start of it for me. And having those resources was hugely encouraging, and from a money standpoint, to realize that there was some help out there that with these rather expensive processes. Sort of caught the bug from there, and the kind of some of the usual suspects, the Joel Salatin and the Stockman Grass Farmer, and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, NRCS, what programs have you taken advantage of there?
I always get confused whether it was the EQIP or the WHIP.
EQIP.
The EQIP. So basically, we just called our local office and said, "Hey, I heard about programs for farms and grazing and such," and they kind of get you set up with the programs they have going on. But yeah, looking, like I said, our property is fairly has a lot of water. So there's a couple intermittent streams and a perennial stream, and so in previous generations, you just fence it all in and let the cows go in and out, and it's a beautiful thing because they can drink, and you just send them up there for the summer, and you're good to go. Current thinking, which I agree with, is let's try to reduce sedimentation and erosion, and so keep the cows out of the streams, fence in the pastures, and give them watering troughs where they're needed. And so that was the first sort of program that we got in with them, and it's been a continuing relationship that lets us develop a comprehensive nutrient management plan and hopefully develop some improved paths throughout the property as well, animal and machine paths.
I was just going to add, resources wise, I think NOFA led me to Acres USA, and I would highly recommend checking that out, as well as other farmers. That has been my biggest resource.
Yeah. Have you ever taken part in the craft program?
I do. Through my family's farm, we did, and through our farm, we haven't. I guess because we don't have a full-on apprenticeship program, and it's actually not for farmers, it's really for farm apprentices. Mm-hmm. We do have a vibrant farmer, in recent months, not so vibrant, but we do have a local Southern Berkshire farmer potluck monthly farm tour group for farmers only. It's not a public event type of thing. So that is one great connection point that we have with each other.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to processing, who do you use for processing?
When we started, we used a couple of the closer slaughterhouses to us, Hilltown Pork, and then we struck up a pretty long relationship with Eagle Bridge in upstate New York. And we moved away from there recently, mostly because it was almost a 2-hour drive for us. And a closer butcher opened up in Connecticut. It's about an hour away. It's kind of far, but we've had a good relationship with them. It's always there still are not enough processing facilities, and there's folks that are trying to work on getting one here in Berkshire County. But depending on what dates we could get, we've trucked animals all the way to Adams and Athol. For us, that's a good 2.5 hours when you're hauling a trailer. But we've been, the ones we've been with long term, we've been happy with and appreciative of.
Yeah. What were some of your, I'm going to switch over to some of the dairy things, and just interested to hear what were some of your motivations for setting up, getting started with dairy?
The early motivation does not have a lot of intellectual power behind it. That was more of a heart-centered move, I'll call it. I just really had an urge to do it, and I was given a dairy, I asked our local big organic dairy that sells to Organic Valley for a cow, and they just gave me a cow of their 1,000 or so to choose from, and we went from there. I just wanted to milk a cow, and we did for a long time without really becoming a full-on certified dairy, and we decided we needed to go big or go home on that.
Or go micro or go home.
Also, there is some synergy with beef and dairy. Dairy cows need to be bred all the time in order to make milk. And so they're always producing replacement heifers, of course, for the cows, but also beef, steers, and heifers.
Helping to milk at that farm, which is right up the road from us. So it wasn't sort of necessarily a novice move, but it was good relationships there. But maybe for the moment, to get a cow for yourself.
Business-wise, there also there aren't a lot of people producing raw milk. So there's ample opportunity. As somebody once told me, I think local food has like 4% of the market. There are so many eaters and so little local food. So there's room for, 20 more little dairies.
Yeah, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the process you went through to develop the micro dairy in your basement.
Actually, NOFA helped us a lot on their website with the resource that they provide. That was our starting point, honestly. It has a link. Unfortunately, the state, we have a great relationship with folks at MDAR, which is the regulating body, but it was difficult to find an exact instruction manual for that, but NOFA provides a link to this. So we started there by reading that building code, and you could talk more about the
Yeah, we just we started taking a look at the regulations and thinking about, okay, how can we do this with our setup? Like I said, we at the time we were still in the process of finishing our house, building our house, and happened to have a walkout basement. One of the main considerations for a dairy is they want you to have concrete floors and impermeable walls, along with all the plumbing, hot water for cleaning, and so on and so forth. And we have a small barn, but thinking about putting the concrete into the dirt floor, just kind of pole barn type situation, and thinking about doing all the improvements up there. Yeah, it was just hugely expensive to do for a business that, you know, has a very thin profit margin, if any. And so we just kind of looked at the, you know, the basement had more space than we needed for basement type stuff. And so we said, well, let's put a door here. We'll bring the cows into this corner of it, and let's build a room out just across the way in the basement. And they're small. The milking parlor is 8 feet by 10 feet. And then it's about a 16-foot walk across to the other room, which is similar size, maybe a touch. Maybe it's 8 by 12. But it does the trick just fine. I mean, we could conceivably, you know, if we could conceivably put 100 pounds a day out the door with that infrastructure, if you know, we wanted to. Most, you know, we're 50, 60 pounds a day is the most we've milked so far.
Two other very important points in building the dairy is meeting with the inspector before you finish, or maybe even before you start, because they're willing to work with you throughout the process. So I think that was a key point. And also grant opportunities. We did receive various grant opportunities over the past several years that benefited the dairy and other projects.
Yep. You know, there's some things that are expensive that you don't, you know, that you don't necessarily think about when you start. And one example being just that you're required to, you know, have your own bottles with your farm name on it. And you could go down the plastic jug route to satisfy that requirement. We decided to go with the glass jugs that you saw in the video, reusable. But it's, you know, I think we had to spend over $2,000 to get those printed and shipped. I'll mention a resource for the dairy also that we use a lot, Bob White Systems out of Vermont as a vendor for a lot of the bits and parts for milking machines. We actually didn't get the bulk. We found the bulk tank lightly used, but they are a vendor for that particular brand of micro dairy bulk tank, and they're a great resource, both for all the things you need, but they're just knowledgeable too. They're people that sell things and they know what they're selling.
Yeah, I was wondering a little bit more about the micro pump that you had there too.
Oh, that was a hand-me-down from Amelia's mother, who used to milk goats in Michigan.
Okay.
It's a small vacuum pump. It's only good enough for one cow.
Also from a really fascinating company that specializes in goat equipment and goats, specifically goat milking. Heger, I believe is how you pronounce it, Hoegger. And one of the brothers of the family that owns that company has branched out on his own and has built, he hand builds these machines, and he builds them for cows and goats now. So yeah, just another neat micro dairy world family that built this neat little vacuum pump.
And yeah, do you see Heidi's question? Any suggestions for a pasture area that's under pine trees and how to get grasses growing in very sandy soil?
I guess I'm not a silvopasture expert by any means, but I've never seen any models that included pine trees. It's pretty much almost always deciduous trees that I've seen modeled in that. And it's gonna have created, I think, pretty acidic soil. So, figuring out ways to open that up, get the light in, get the soil disturbed to a point of allowing the seed bank to come back, I think would be some of the first steps. Yeah, just reducing the density of the pine trees, or depending on what else is coming up, they're getting rid of them. Depending on how old they are. How big are the pine trees?
So there's a couple pine trees, and it's an open area, so it's only just like part of the pasture, I guess.
Okay.
And we only have a couple alpacas and a llama, so we have the manure, and I try to spread it around, but it just seems, I don't know, it just seems like terrible soil.
Yeah. But also there's sheep propagating a lot underneath that pine.
Yes. So I would say that's like half of the pasture, and the other half's fairly open. There's no other trees. So I was hoping to get at least part of it in use.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would say eliminate one of them, because that heavy traffic of the animals underneath the tree is really gonna be tough to compete with for the grasses.
Also, the shade is extremely useful.
Yes.
In and of itself, which I'm sure you're
Right. Thank you.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the different breeds that you've obtained or have chosen to work with.
Why don't you start with the cows?
We really run the gamut on breeds for the cows, both dairy and beef. We are not a beautiful uniform. Well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but it is not a registered Jersey herd, for example, or anyway, we haven't gone all in on one breed. We have, I don't know, some breeds out there, and I think that's been good to experiment with all the different breeds, to breed them to each other, so you get something that people refer to as hybrid vigor, which I do believe in. And anyhow, right now we're leaning toward Jersey with the cows, although they are not the hardiest of animals, and our pastures are not extremely lush river bottom pastures. They are much recovered from what they were, but they're still not super high test, high capacity type pastures. So we're figuring out that balance of high production animal and adequate feed. And on the beef end, the two breeds that we've been working with most are Hereford and Dutch Belted.
Belted Galloway.
Belted Galloway, which I always confuse. And we love them both. I find the Belted Galloway to be a little bit too wild management-wise. They're a heritage breed, and they're really wild cows. But they do really well on any type of forage. I mean, they can beef out on pine needles probably. And they're extremely hardy.
Only that we've definitely trended towards naturally polled beef animals, so the Herefords and the Belties fall under for sure. We did bring in a British White young bull that you saw in the video to cross with some of our beef animals eventually. That was mostly because the opportunity came up, and we know the person that has the British White herd, and he's developed excellent animals with excellent genetics, and so that just seemed like a good thing to bring into the herd. You know, we've never traveled or inquired far afield to bring in, you know, like the top level for genetics or things like that. But we are constantly looking to find the herds that are producing good animals and try to bring some of those qualities into our herd, for sure. Our pigs are they're sort of mutts, but they're Berkshire crosses. There's some spot in there, and you know, if we occasionally have to buy in a litter, and so sometimes we've only raised a couple litters over the years with some Yorkshire blood in there, but they've done fine. We you know, typically just found pigs to be very hardy and pretty easy keepers, and we're not really going for super artisan type meat business, so it's been less of a concern for us. And the chickens we do are they go by several trade names. They're the Rainbow Rangers or the Freedom Rangers, or
I know you do have a interesting relationship with your neighbors too. I was wondering if you could speak about how you manage to work with, you know, your neighbors and grazing and things like that.
With Ronald?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in our area in particular, land is expensive and hard to come by. And so thankfully there is a culture in the area of folks that own land and allowing farmers to use that land, whether that's for crop land, hay land, or pasture land. And so after doing this, you know, we've been in business now for 7 or 8 years. We've slowly been able to develop relationships with our neighbors and community members, because it's not always right next door, for that extra grazing ground, which is hugely helpful, allows us to expand the herd, as well as for hay ground, where we can bring in some contract hay folks to make some hay for us, and both reduce our costs and provide some security in terms of the sourcing of hay, and reduce the amount of trucking and travel that we have to do in the winter to supply hay for the cows. But that's been great, and there's benefit to the neighbors in terms of the tax break they get if they put that land into Chapter 61 land. So we've, you know, in places where we've paid rent for grazing ground, it's pretty nominal, and more often than not, it's the exchange is that tax benefit for folks.
Yes.
And some yeah.
And then I was wondering about the additional feed and or hay that you provide. Where are you sourcing all that stuff?
One of the most exciting things that we're doing this year, Will mentioned contract haying. So we do not own any haying equipment. We don't do any haying, and we buy all of our hay in, which is substantial. I think last year we spent about $15,000 on hay. And so instead of buying it at a quote unquote retail rate and picking it up every week or every 2 weeks, really every week, the quantity that we're using, we've contracted with landowners and larger farms to make hay for us that we pick up in the field and store at our farm. So we're doing all of the hauling and storing now as they're making the hay ahead of time. We did receive an MDAR grant to put up a big greenhouse to store that hay in. So anyhow, that's just an exciting thing that we're doing this year. The grain that we buy for the pigs and the poultry, we buy from Stonehouse Farm in Hudson, New York. It's about an hour from us. They are a big, really big farm that grows grain. They grow organic grain. They also grow certified non-GMO grain. And they helped us transition to grinding our own grain. They helped us with formulas. Fortrell is a great company and resource also for learning how to grind your own grain. And yeah, we've had a great experience with them.
Yeah, the question is, do you have any tips for creating your own feed rations? I was thinking something along that line. What is your ratio?
That was the Fortrell website.
I've literally followed the Fortrell website recommendations. I think that they're excellent. And I think that in partnership with maybe your local grain mill or somebody who's also doing that commercially is, yeah.
They're a good resource. I did come across another great one for hogs, and I don't know if the question was specific to hogs, but the Piggery, which is an outfit I think in upstate New York in the Ithaca area, they somewhere in the depths of their website they had a whole spreadsheet on different hog rations and ratios of corn to wheat, soy, and kale and various other grains, and how that affected a hog's growth, and how that affected a hog's fat, content, but also texture or nature. There's a lot that goes into it. So that particular resource was quite handy in trying to figure in deciding which grains to feed.
I don't think you have to worry as much about exact formulation when animals are outside foraging and receiving nutrients in other ways. I think so it's just another thing to think about, how high test and needy are these. Almost like if they were vegetables, are they, peppers, tomatoes, and corn, or are they, something that's not a heavy feeder and can really work with all different kinds of ratios.
The other nice thing about creating our own rations is that we milk. So if we have excess milk and we give that to the hogs, and I know that there's going to be a regular amount of milk going to the hogs, I can back off, say, on the soy part of the ration, and that's a saver, because the roasted soybeans are definitely the most expensive piece of the ration. We mix our chicken grain mixes as well. The one funny thing about the chicken grain mixes is the additives that as well, especially for the broilers. They're bred to grow fast, and they, Joel Salatin compares them. Now he does Cornish crosses, which is even more of he calls them Ferraris, and so says that they need, therefore, high test gasoline, which is true. So depending on whether you're mixing for egg layers or broilers, there's these additives. We had kelp meal.
Additives might give the wrong impression. They're basically expensive minerals, fish meal, everything that we ordered through Fortrell, which you can't order from directly, by the way. You have to order through a Fortrell supplier. That did get a little expensive. I was going to add something. Oh, I just wanted to add that the grinder that we bought was $850. Is that correct?
Yep.
Anyhow, it wasn't that may seem like an insane purchase for a little flock of 10 birds, but I don't know, it wasn't a $10,000 piece of equipment.
Yeah. No, we bought that through Premier One. It's made in Italy, and it's just a simple hammer mill. Runs on 220, and it'll grind 50 pounds of feed in under 5 minutes.
And we work that puppy to the bone.
We do. We grind a lot of feed.
Are you grinding feed fresh every day, or do you grind a week's worth or something like that?
Ideally, we grind a week's worth, but usually we're grinding 2 or 3 times a week.
Yeah.
And one improvement we made this past year as part of also moving to grinding our own was we were using an old box truck to store grain that was not rodent proof. It started out relatively rodent proof, but they had their way with it. So we bought a shipping container and put the grinder in there, and we store all the grain along one side of one wall and have the grinder right across from them, and there's a nice little aisle, and so it's an easy transfer from one to the other. I guess. Yeah,
Do you have any exciting things that you're planning for the rest of the growing season?
Oh, I'm going to get a new cow tomorrow to add to the herd. We've had a lot of demand for milk lately, or a lot of demand for all the products lately. Yeah, we're gonna go pick up a cow in Ashfield tomorrow, bright and early.
I think the hay,
Yeah.
the hay switch is really the most exciting thing. And we have adequate help right now. That's always an exciting piece of the puzzle. Somebody who has experience and is working on the farm 20 hours a week. And he's really brought some of our chore systems to the next level. So that's, and it really just brings, I don't know, somebody else coming on your farm is good in so many ways.
Yeah, that's a good point. I forgot to ask. Has it just been you two, basically, for the start?
Yeah, from the beginning, it really was just us two, but fairly early on, we brought on a person, one or two people. It could even just be one milking shift a week, one morning a week that you get off. And we started that fairly early, and then we realized that also brings conversation. It also brings that other person is connected to the world, doing other things, working other jobs, has a whole other family and friend set. And so we fairly consistently kept a whole, now we have maybe 5 or 6 people that cycle in and out. Out of fairly limited, it could be just a one hour chore shift of feeding the hogs. It can be very limited. And most of that is a barter relationship aside from our 20-hour-a-week employee.
Yeah. Well, we have working share members. We have 2 of those. And yeah, it's great to have people that are, start out as customers, become workers. It's been a nice relationship for us to have with folks like that. And it allows us to, to do more of the other work besides just the chores, whether that's some infrastructure improvements, whether that's just having that 45 minutes or an hour to sit down and meet and do planning, whatever it might be. It's super helpful.
Yeah. As you mentioned planning, do you have a grazing plan that you work off of, or do you just sort of wing it in a way?
No, now we don't use any maps or notebooks or anything. We just watch animal behavior in the pastures. But I will say in the beginning, we did, and I'm just remembering for everything we did. actually, and now it's a lot more instinctual and observation based. But in the beginning, we exclusively used notebooks and yeah, lots of planning. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
I'm just seeing Christy's question. So she's asking about keeping dry cows and heifers and beef stock on marginal areas and lactating cows on premium pasture. We do keep the herds separate, actually. So I shouldn't say we don't, especially in the winter, we are feeding those lactating cows higher quality hay, second cutting hay, baleage, feed, higher quality feed, higher protein feed to keep that milk coming and also to keep them happy and healthy. We're a little bit more limited in the summer months because our neighbor's pasture where we have the beef herd and growing stock and dry cows is a higher quality pasture, but we can't have the dairy cows so far from home because they need to be milked every day. So there's a little bit of that would be the ideal pasture for them forage wise, but it is not the ideal location. We do try to keep the dairy herd that we have at home fairly small so that the pasture and rotated extremely frequently. So that's sort of the best that we can do right now. That is something that we think about all the time. And you can see a beef cow that's not lactating and not stressed in other ways fill out on fairly marginal forage if it's a cow that has the genetics to do so. Are you going to add anything?
No, only that just to be, more specifically that with that dairy herd, typically the dry cows are pastured with the lactating cows. Again, that's just because we're able to keep them together. If the pastures were stressed, I would probably look to move the dry cows over to to mix in with the beef herd. Typically, those dry cows, if we're doing our job right on a breeding, from a breeding standpoint, we're going to be calving relatively soon again, and so keeping, having them around to keep an eye on them when they do calve is important. And so it's just give and take the time needed to truck them and what the pasture's like.
Thank you so much, Will. Thank you so much, Amelia. We just really appreciative of all your insight and all the information. And then thanks everyone for joining us again. If you like this event, there's another event coming up on it's actually July 9th, so in 2 weeks. And that is going to be Toffer Sabat at Cricket Creek Farm, who will talk about his operation. They have about 30 to 40 milking cows, and they also intensively rotate their herds. And that will be again July 9th at this time. That's a Thursday. And I want to thank again our grant funders, Mass Dairy Farmers, and the Berkshire Taconic Community Foundation Green Pastures Fund. And thanks again to our sponsor, Organic Valley. And as well, if you enjoy this type of online platform, our summer conference is coming up, and it's going to be an amazing gathering. All the over 60 presentations will be recorded, and so with the price of your registration, you get to have all those recordings at your convenience, and you can watch them whenever you like. As well, the NOFA Organic Land Care Program is offering their accreditation course in organic land care online for the first time this August. And I hope if you are interested in organic land care, take this opportunity to learn at your convenience. Spaces are limited, so don't wait to sign up. And registration information and course curriculum can be found at organiclandcare.net. So thank you all again for being a part of the NOFA Mass community. I look forward to seeing you next time.